Good morning, Source family. It is good to be in worship with you all today. My name is Brandi Horton, and I'm one of the pastors here. I hope that you have a Bible out and that you will follow along. I hope that you have a pen ready and you will take notes. And I hope that you will engage in the chat. Let us know that you are worshiping with us whenever you happen to be worshiping with us. This morning, I'm going to begin with a confession. I have a shero. I am a 31-year-old woman who occasionally fangirls, which is totally a verb, over my hero. I want to learn from this person. I want to be this person when I grow up. My hero is a 73-year-old retired United Methodist bishop named Janice Riggle Huey. Bishop Huey is the reason that I believed women really could go into ministry and be fruitful. She is the reason that I say friends a lot in meetings and in worship. She is the kind of innovative, courageous leader that I long to be. Well, anyway, the year before I was ordained, Bishop Huey and I were on a mission trip together with others in the Rio Grande Valley, and they said that the two smallest people had to get into the back of this 16-passenger van. Well, the two smallest people were me and the bishop. And so we got in the back of the van and we had a good little drive to where we were going. And here I was in the back of the van with my shero. And so you all know me. I started asking endless amounts of questions about leadership and ministry, hoping that she would teach me everything that she knew. At some point in the conversation, I said to Bishop Huey, if you could go back and do it all again, what would you do differently? And without missing a beat, Bishop Huey said, I would have gotten involved with children and schools faster. I would have started investing in the young sooner. I wrote it down, of course, I wrote it down, but I remember thinking that every church could get on board with that it was not hard. We all want more young people in our pews. We all want our nurseries full of babies in our children's wing, and we want youth groups that are big enough that they need their own brightly painted spaces. We are almost all willing to nod and say, yes, young people are important. But I've found that it gets a lot harder when we have to put our money or our time or our resources or our trust where our mouth is. Today's passage from 1 Timothy is probably one that you've heard before, encouraging young people to set an example, to not be afraid, to lead. But I think we most often hear it out of context and we forget that it is part of a longer letter. Even though the pastoral epistles, as the letters to Timothy and to Titus are called, are personal, they are also meant for the entire congregation. In several places, Paul uses the plural form of the word you, which tells us that these were for the edification of the whole body. So Timothy is reading the qualities of a good minister that starts in 1 Timothy 4:11. And when he gets to about verse 12 and says, let no one despise your youth, he's probably reading aloud to the very people who were despising his youth. It gets a bit awkward. But this is a word for Timothy and a word for the whole church. This is not just a charge for Timothy to not be afraid. This is a charge for the whole church to remember that their devaluing of him because of his age is not okay. Timothy is staying in Ephesus to preach and to teach and to ensure that some of the church do not go astray and follow a false doctrine. When we first meet Timothy in Acts 16, he is significantly younger than he is at this point in the story, but he's described, even in Acts 16, in words that suggest that he had maturity beyond his years. By this time, in 1 Timothy, he's about 30 years old, with about 10 years of ministry experience under his belt. But the church, at least the church in Ephesus, is not ready to hear him preach until he has a few more gray hairs. I know exactly what this feels like. Every church anywhere wants a 37-year-old pastor who looks a respectable 65 with 20 years of ministry experience on their resume. But that's not what the Spirit always sends to the church, and that's not actually what the church always needs. Sometimes the church needs Timothy. Sometimes we need to get involved with children and schools sooner, to start investing in the young sooner, to let our young people and our children lead. That's easy to agree to, but it's much harder to practice. But why? Why is that hard? This morning, I want to offer 3 reasons that the church sometimes resists the leadership of the young. First, we equate age with wisdom, when wisdom is actually the gift of God. At the beginning of the book of Proverbs, the writer of Proverbs is saying that there is value in paying attention to wisdom. Proverbs 2:6 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." The Hebrew word used here for wisdom is chakmah, which in the Old Testament is often used to refer to something that God puts in you, or something that is associated with the Spirit of God. Nowhere could I find where wisdom was earned with years of experience. I also couldn't find anywhere where wisdom corresponded to the number of books that you had read, which I'll admit was a bit of a disappointment to me. Wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge and intelligence. Knowledge is about information and data. It's about your head, but wisdom is about discernment, about knowing the truth. It's more about your heart. And there's no age requirement or limit on that. Sometimes our experience and our increased knowledge and our long tenure with God do imbue us with wisdom. But sometimes, as we age, our discernment gets clouded by shoulds and should nots, by a lack of creativity, by knowing what has already been tried before. And we end up not being wiser, but being more pessimistic and more paralyzed when we're making decisions. Sometimes it is the simplicity, the clarity, the confidence, the courage, the openness of the young that allows God to speak wisdom through them. One of the gifts, well, that's really a question mark if it's a gift or not, of this pandemic has been that occasionally in our church staff meeting, church staff children end up on our calls because, well, they're there. And we were having a meeting one day, and Caroline was just off the screen playing with her Play-Doh, and a group of staff members were going round and round, I think about reopening plans and possibilities, bouncing these what ifs and what happens when off of one another. And to be honest, I remember in that conversation feeling stuck. And then Caroline, without looking up from her Play-Doh creation, just says, "Just do the next right thing." I laughed and told the team her suggestion, and then we asked ourselves, what is the next right thing? And we ended up making a decision based on that. My 3-year-old got 5 professional adults to stop talking in circles. Now, I'm not saying that Caroline is wise all the time. You all heard the cleaning the bathroom with the toilet water story last week, but I am suggesting that we can't neglect or overlook the wisdom that God is giving to our children and our youth and our young people. Reading Paul's letter to Timothy, it becomes clear that Timothy does not have authority because of his office or his rank. He has authority because of his connection to Paul, because, as Paul says in chapter 1, he follows his conscience, and because his life matches his words. He doesn't counter people's attacks on his age with this kind of well thought out defense. He doesn't argue with the head knowledge that he obtained on his Pauline internship. The best counter, and the way that Timothy counters these attacks, is with actions. Actions of kind speech and positive behavior, of love and of faith, and of sexual purity. This is the wisdom that flows not just from his head, but from his heart, and from his hands, and from his trust in God. We are never too young or too old, too new to our faith, or too unsure of ourselves for God to give us the wisdom and the strength to set an example for the world around us. Which brings me to the second reason that the church resists the leadership of the young. We think that they are the future of the church, but they are actually its present too. Timothy was charged with preaching and teaching in Ephesus, helping the people follow Jesus as opposed to following false teachings. According to Paul, Timothy was not supposed to sit and wait his turn. He was not supposed to grow into or even maybe fully understand what he was doing before exercising the gifts that God had given him. Paul says, do not neglect the spiritual gifts in you. Now, I understand that Timothy was not exactly a child here, but sometimes we think even that our young adults have not fully grown into their gifts or their callings, as if the gift of God or the call of God were a Christmas sweater that was 3 sizes too big. But what that really means is that we have an idea of how that sweater is supposed to fit. We have an idea about the way that we normally see it worn. And that preaching, that teaching, that leadership, that wisdom, that love, that faith, that purity looks odd on something so small. But what if God doesn't follow our size chart? What if God doesn't follow our size chart? We think God's gifts and calls only fit on an extra large, but sometimes God wears a small, or maybe even a 2T. What if God thinks the sweater, the gift, the call fits just right because he picked it out, because he gave it to them and he intended for them to wear it? God is not holding out on giving gifts to our children and our young people until they understand them. God is not waiting to give grace to our kids until they can fully articulate what it means in their lives. God does not distinguish between the future of the church and its present. God simply calls his people the church, and his people includes babies and kids and youth and young adults and middle-aged adults and older adults and kids at heart. Rabbi Menachem Creditor noticed a disturbing trend in his synagogue. He noticed that members of his congregation began asking other members of his congregation to take their children and their children's noises out of the synagogue. It was disturbing worship. It was making it less solemn. It was detracting from their own experience of God. The rabbi wisely responded, "Our sanctuaries are not sanctuaries from our children. Our sanctuaries are sanctuaries for our children. Children have a part to play in the family of God, not after they turn 18 or when they learn to sit quietly in church, but from the very moment they are born. God does not wait until we are legal adults to say that we are ready for ministry. God does not wait until we are 40 to say that we are able to lead the church. Thank goodness. God has a history of choosing and using unlikely leaders, not waiting for some unknown future when they might be ready, but using them when the people of God need them. King David was 30 years old when he united the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. The prophet Jeremiah is known for having an exceptionally long career, but maybe he had an exceptionally long career because he was 17 when he started. Jesus was 30 when his ministry began. It's likely that Timothy was about 20 when he met up with Paul and began journeying with Paul. Martin Luther was 34 when he nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. John Wesley was 26 when he started the Holy Club at Oxford. And Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 when he began leading the Montgomery bus boycott. If any of these people had waited until the future or until it was their turn, they would have missed it. Which brings me to the third reason that the church sometimes resists the leadership of the young. Sometimes we would rather choose comfort than change. And young people change the world and the church. As a young pastor, I have been told more than once that I just don't know how things are done yet, that I just need to learn how we've always done it, that I need to get with the program and I'll be okay. But friends, how we've always done it is not going to work for me. And it's not going to work for my friends either. It's okay. I'm in good company. It didn't work for David or Jeremiah or Jesus or Timothy or Martin Luther or John Wesley or Martin Luther King Jr. either. As soon as you allow young people to lead, to step up, to use their gifts, to be part of the larger church, you are inviting in change. When adults are stumped or paralyzed or resigned that things will never change, that things will never get better, that it's just life, young people keep moving. They keep going. They keep hoping. They keep dreaming of other solutions. For them, I guess maybe I should probably say, for us, it's about the world and the church that we want to live in and with for the long term. I have 41 years of ministry left, and I will not dedicate my life to keeping on, to continued congregational ineffectiveness and decline across the church as a whole and across our denomination specifically, or to believing that there are not solutions or answers to the hurt that exists in this world. I won't do it. Not when I serve a God who makes a way out of no way. Not when I follow a God who is a God of constant change and transformation and renewal. Not when I follow a God who came back from the dead. I actually hope that's true of you, no matter what age you are. But what I find is that age and experience give us reasons to think that something is not possible. And our kids and our youth keep looking for how it is. They are not as easily deterred as we are. You don't have to teach a kid that something is possible. Ask my child who fully believes that there are invisible dinosaurs and chickens taking up residence in her room. It's possible for her. We teach children and youth and young adults to believe that things are impossible. I Googled young leaders, and the first thing that comes up is the United Nations list that is titled Leaders Who Changed the World. And I scrolled through it. It was a list of kids and young adults from across the globe who were frankly solving some of our biggest COVID-19 questions and problems. They're not coming up with vaccines, but they've been crowdsourcing in Canada to find ways to pay rent. They've been finding ways to translate health information to illiterate people in Nigeria. They've been pooling and redistributing dry goods in India so that more people have food to eat. They've been creating networks of childcare workers and tutors and pods to help parents who need to work in Colorado. None of their solutions would have been mine. They all push my creativity and maybe even my comfort, and definitely they push my generosity, but they work. Retired United Methodist Bishop Will Willimon says that impatience and impetuousness are gifts of the young that the church desperately needs. I'll add to that to say that the world desperately needs. We need the impatience and the courage and the willingness to risk failure of our kids and our youth and our young adults. We need to hear the Timothys in our midst that have something to say, but that don't have the gray hair and the gravitas to give weight to their message. We need to see the examples of their love and their lives. Church, my charge to you today is twofold. If you find yourself no longer young in years, then listen to, pay attention to, give leadership to, trust, risk relationship with, seek out the gifts of young people. You will learn something. You will be changed. And if you are young, whether you are a kid who has somehow miraculously lasted this long in the sermon, or you are a youth, or you are a young adult, step up. Don't be afraid. It's your turn. Let's pray.